She looked like any other devoted mother. She posted Bible verses on Facebook, she coached cheerleading, she volunteered at church, she had a smile that made strangers feel immediately at ease, and a warmth about her that drew people in like a magnet. She was also completely convinced that her 2 children had been taken over by evil spirits, and she was willing to do whatever it took to deal with that. In the fall of 2019, 7-year-old J.J. Vallow and 17-year-old Tylee Ryan vanished without a trace. No goodbye, no note, no explanation. Their mother, Lori Vallow, told anyone who asked that the children were fine, staying with family, staying with friends, perfectly safe. She even flew to Hawaii with her brand new husband just weeks later and posted beach photos that would later haunt the entire internet. But JJ and Tylee were not with family, they were not with friends, and they were absolutely not safe. And the reason Lori Vallow was not out looking for her missing children is because she already knew exactly where they were. This is the story of Lori Vallow, and it is one of the most deeply disturbing cases I have ever covered on this channel. True crime, dark stories, and the kind of cases that keep you up at night, all things I'm mildly obsessed with. And based on the fact that you're still here, so are you. Okay, hi, welcome back, or welcome if you're new here. Genuinely good choice, great time to join, although maybe not for this specific video because this one is a lot. Like, I have been sitting on this case for weeks because I needed to be in the right headspace for it. It involves children. It involves religion being completely weaponized. It involves a woman who looked people dead in the eye and lied without blinking. And we're gonna get into it. All right, without further ado, let's dive into the Lori Vallow case together. Lori Vallow was born Lori Noreen Cox on June 26, 1973 in San Bernardino, California. And on the surface, she had a fairly ordinary upbringing. She grew up in a religious household with strong ties to the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, and faith was genuinely central to her life from a very young age. And by most accounts, young Lori was magnetic, charismatic, the kind of person who walked into a room and immediately owned it. She was attractive, sociable, and deeply personable. People just gravitated to her naturally. She was also married, frequently. Now I say that not to judge because look, life is messy, relationships are complicated. I genuinely understand that people grow apart, but Lori's marriage history is actually really important to understanding how this whole story unfolds. So stick with me here. Her first marriage was to a man named Nelson Ambra in 1992, ended in divorce. Her second marriage was to William LaJoya in 1995, also ended in divorce. And notably, there were allegations of domestic abuse in that relationship against Lori. She was accused of being the one doing the abusing, which, already a little telling. Her third marriage was to a man named Joseph Ryan, and this one gets significantly darker. Joseph Ryan was later accused of sexually abusing Lori's daughter Tylee, who was born during this marriage in 2002. Tylee Ryan. Please hold on to that name because Tylee matters so much in this story. Joseph Ryan died in 2018 of a cardiac event. And I want you to keep that in mind. The pattern of men connected to Lori Vallow meeting early ends, because it will become relevant shortly. Her fourth marriage was to a man named Charles Vallow in 2006, and Charles, Chuck, was by every account a genuinely wonderful human being. He was a successful businessman from Texas. He had a huge heart. He was warm and generous, and he absolutely adored Lori. They built a life together in Arizona, and he adopted her son JJ, Joshua Jacob Vallow, a beautiful 7-year-old boy with autism who was funny and full of personality and loved by everyone who met him. And Chuck loved that little boy like he was his own flesh and blood. And for a while, it really did seem like Lori had found her person, like she had finally landed in the life she was supposed to be living. A loving husband, 2 children, a home, a church community. From the outside, it looked genuinely beautiful. But underneath all of that, something had been quietly, steadily shifting inside of Lori, and it was about to change everything for everyone around her. To understand what happened to Lori Vallow's family, you have to understand Chad Daybell. because Chad Daybell is the other half of this very dark equation. Chad Daybell was born in 1969 in Rexburg, Idaho, and where Lori was warm and magnetic and social, Chad was quiet and bookish and largely unremarkable to people who passed them on the street. He worked in the funeral industry for years, which, again, I'm not saying that means anything on its own, I'm just noting it, and in his spare time, he was a self-published author of apocalyptic fiction loosely inspired by LDS theology and end times prophecy. Now, here is where things start to get uncomfortable, because Chad wasn't just writing entertaining novels for a niche audience. Chad had developed a very specific set of personal religious beliefs that went far beyond anything in standard LDS doctrine. He believed he had been granted the ability to communicate with spirits from the other side. He believed he could assess a person's spiritual standing, whether their spirit was aligned with light or had been taken over by a dark, malevolent force. And he had built a small but devoted following of people who genuinely believed he was some kind of prophet. He had a podcast, a newsletter, a preparedness community called Preparing a People. And look, a podcast and a newsletter sound about as threatening as a farmer's market. But when the content of those things involves telling your audience that the apocalypse is arriving in 2020 and that some of the people in their lives might literally be dark spirits wearing human skin, that's when we move from eccentric hobby into something requiring much more serious attention. Chad was also, at this point in time, married. His wife of nearly 30 years was a woman named Tammy Daybell. Tammy was a school librarian. She was a mother. She was active in her local community. She was, by all accounts, a completely ordinary, completely decent person who had absolutely nothing to do with any of this. And I need you to hold on to Tammy's name, because Tammy matters enormously. Lori and Chad met at a religious preparedness conference in 2018, and whatever happened between them in that room, whether it was genuine spiritual alignment or two manipulative people recognizing something useful in each other, they became immediately and intensely connected. And within months, that connection had crossed every appropriate boundary imaginable. Okay, this is the part of the story where I really need you to stay with me, because what I'm about to describe is going to sound completely unhinged, and it is, but it is also the direct key to understanding everything that happens next. So, Chad Daybell's belief system, which Lori fully adopted and apparently co-developed, held that every human being exists somewhere on a spiritual spectrum. On one end, you had what they called light people. Light people were spiritually pure, divinely chosen, connected to God, important. And on the other end of that spectrum were what they referred to as dark people, or, and this is the word they actually used, zombies. And when I say zombies, I want to be really clear that I do not mean the shuffling, groaning, brain-eating kind. What I mean, in the framework of their belief system, is a person whose original spirit had left their body and been replaced by a dark or evil entity. Basically, a human being who was still walking around and functioning and talking and existing, but was no longer, in their view, really that person. The real person was gone. What was left was just a vessel for something dark. And here is the part that should make your stomach drop. Because in Chad and Lori's worldview, if someone had gone dark, if they had become a zombie, they were essentially already spiritually dead. The person you thought you knew no longer existed, and therefore, harming that body wasn't really harming a person. You see where this is going. What investigators would later piece together through recovered text messages, private journals, and recorded conversations is that by 2019, Lori and Chad had begun assigning these spiritual labels to the people in their immediate lives, deciding who was light, who was dark, who was, in their view, no longer really there. And among those they had decided had gone dark were Lori's own children, JJ and Tylee. Let's go back to late 2018 and early 2019. because this is when the situation begins to fracture publicly. Charles Vallow had started noticing deeply alarming changes in Lori. She had become increasingly consumed by Chad Daybell's teachings. She was spending long hours in online communities built around his content. She had started talking about end times prophecy with a fervor that genuinely frightened people around her. And she had confided, to at least one family member, that she believed she was a translated being, a divine, resurrected figure who had been sent to Earth to personally help usher in the second coming of Christ. Chuck was worried, not mildly concerned worried, genuinely, deeply, can't sleep worried. In January of 2019, he filed for divorce, and he told family members that he was frightened for Lori's mental state and for the safety of his children. He documented in texts that Lori had threatened him, that if he tried to take the children, she would have him killed. He wrote that, in texts. He told multiple people he was afraid. He put it on record. And I want to sit with that for a moment because Charles Vallow saw what was coming. He tried to raise the alarm, and the system, the people around him, the institutions that should have intervened, did not protect him. In July of 2019, Charles Vallow was shot and killed inside his sister-in-law's home in Chandler, Arizona. The shooter was Lori's brother, Alex Cox. Alex told police it was self-defense, that Chuck had come at him with a baseball bat and he had no choice. And initially, that is exactly what authorities ruled it. Self-defense. Case closed. Chuck was dead, Alex walked free. And Lori, who was present in the home, faced no charges. Within weeks of her husband's death, Lori had pulled her children out of school, packed up her life, and was making plans to relocate to Rexburg, Idaho, the very same small town in eastern Idaho where Chad Daybell and his wife Tammy lived. On October 19, 2019, Tammy Daybell died in her sleep at her family home in Rexburg, Idaho. She was 49 years old. Local authorities initially ruled her death as natural causes, a cardiac event. She was buried, her family grieved, and 2 weeks later, Chad Daybell and Lori Vallow were married in a small, quiet ceremony in Hawaii. I need you to sit with that timeline for a moment, because I think about it a lot. A woman dies suddenly in her sleep. Her husband, who has been secretly romantically involved with another woman, marries that exact woman within 2 weeks of burying his wife of nearly 30 years. And at the time, no alarm bell rang loudly enough. No one pressed hard enough. They just got married, went to Hawaii, smiled on the beach, and posted photos. Tammy's body was later exhumed in December of 2019 after investigators had grown seriously suspicious of the entire sequence of events surrounding her death. When the results of the second autopsy came back, the cause of death was reclassified. Tammy Daybell had not died of natural causes. She was murdered. Tammy Daybell was a school librarian who loved her children, loved her community, and had done absolutely nothing wrong. She was killed because she was in the way. Where are the children? Now, this is the part of the case where I genuinely struggle to find the right words, because it becomes something beyond what I can fully process emotionally, even having researched this for weeks. J.J. Vallow, 7 years old, Tylee Ryan, 17. Both of Lori's children had last been seen in September of 2019. JJ's last confirmed sighting was September 23, 2019, captured in a photograph during a family visit to Yellowstone National Park with Lori, Tylee, and Alex Cox. After that, nothing. Lori told different people different stories about where the children were. She told JJ's grandparents, Kay and Larry Woodcock, who were Chuck's family, and who absolutely adored that little boy, that JJ was staying with a family friend in Arizona. When Kay and Larry pushed for more contact, for a phone call, for any confirmation that JJ was okay, Lori gave them vague answers and eventually stopped responding. Kay and Larry Woodcock did not accept that, and I want to stop and genuinely acknowledge them here, because they went to police, they went to the media, they sat in front of cameras with grief all over their faces, and they begged the public to help find their grandson. They refused to be brushed off by anyone. They would not be quiet. And they are a significant reason this case received the national attention it did. They saved this story from becoming just another set of missing children that nobody looked hard enough for. In January of 2020, police in Rexburg went to Chad and Lori's home to conduct a welfare check specifically on the children. Lori answered the door. She told officers JJ was in Arizona with a family friend, gave them a name. Police followed up with that person immediately. That person had not seen JJ in months. She had no idea why Lori had given her name. Lori refused further questioning. Chad refused further questioning. And within days, both of them had left Idaho completely and flown to Kauai, Hawaii, where they continued to post photos on the beach, smiling. Police issued an official missing children's alert for JJ and Tylee. Lori was charged in Idaho with desertion and non-support of dependent children. And in February of 2020, she was arrested in Hawaii. She smiled for her arrest photo. On June 9, 2020, investigators executed a search warrant at Chad Daybell's property in Salem, Idaho. And in the backyard of that quiet house in that small Idaho town, they found the remains of both children. J.J. Vallow and Tylee Ryan had been there since the fall of 2019. Since shortly after they were each last seen alive, Tylee Ryan was 17 years old. She wanted to be a nurse. She loved her little brother JJ with a fierce, protective love and called him her best friend. She was funny and creative and opinionated, and she had her entire life ahead of her. JJ Vallow was 7 years old. He was described by every single person who knew him as pure light. He communicated and moved through the world in his own beautiful way. He was loved beyond any reasonable measure by his grandparents, his teachers, and everyone who was lucky enough to know him. Both of them were gone, and their mother had known exactly where they were the entire time. The investigation that followed was extensive. Federal and local law enforcement spent years piecing together what had actually happened, working through thousands of text messages, private journal entries, financial records, and testimonies from people who had been inside Chad and Lori's inner circle. What emerged was a portrait of two people who had constructed a shared belief system so complete and so total that it had overridden every human instinct, every parental bond, every moral boundary, in service of what they were convinced was divine instruction. Text messages recovered between Lori and Chad referenced the children using their light and dark framework, discussing them not as children to be loved and protected, but as problems requiring resolution. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, who had also shot Charles Vallow, had played a direct role in what happened to the children before his own death from a blood clot in December of 2019. A death that, given everything surrounding it, has never stopped raising questions. Lori Vallow stood trial in the spring of 2023 in Boise, Idaho. The trial lasted several weeks and included testimony from dozens of witnesses, including former members of Chad's inner circle who had once believed in the same framework Lori had used to justify what she did. On May 12, 2023, the jury returned their verdict: guilty on all counts. Guilty of the first-degree murder of her son, J.J. Vallow. Guilty of the first-degree murder of her daughter, Tylee Ryan. Guilty of conspiracy to commit the murder of Tammy Daybell. And guilty of grand theft. In July of 2023, Lori Vallow Daybell was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no emotion during the verdict. She showed no emotion at sentencing. As far as any public record reflects, she has never expressed remorse for what she did to her children. And in June of 2024, Chad Daybell was convicted on all counts as well, including 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death. I think about JJ and Tylee a lot, more than I probably should, but I also think that's just the right thing to do, because they deserve to be thought about. They deserve to be so much more than a true crime headline or a case number in a filing system somewhere. Tylee was a teenager trying to figure out who she was, the way all teenagers do. And JJ was a little boy whose whole world was the people who were supposed to keep him safe. And what I keep coming back to is how many people around Lori and Chad saw warning signs, saw the erratic behavior, the alarming beliefs, the string of suspicious deaths, and how many times those concerns were dismissed, explained away, or simply not taken seriously enough until it was too late. Charles Vallow told people he was afraid. He documented it. He went on record. And the system still did not protect him or his children. This case is also, and I think this is really important to say out loud, a reminder of what can happen when religious belief becomes entirely unchecked and entirely unaccountable. When someone surrounds themselves only with people who reinforce their worldview, when they systematically cut off anyone who questions them, when faith gets twisted into a mechanism for justifying cruelty toward the people who are supposed to be most protected by you. JJ and Tylee deserved so much more than what they got, and I hope that wherever they are, they know they were loved. By their grandparents who never stopped fighting for them, by strangers on the internet who cried reading their story, by people like you who are still here, still paying attention, still refusing to let their names be forgotten. And with that is the Lori Vallow case. This was a heavy one of the heaviest I've done on this channel. If you want me to go deeper into the Chad Daybell trial, into Alex Cox's role, into the full scope of what investigators found, let me know down below, because there is genuinely so much more to this story. I always read the comments. Until next time, please stay safe, hold the people you love a little closer tonight, and I will see your beautiful video